on the south lawn of the White House in front of the president, a crowd full of Americans and the whole world watching. A fighter with almost no boxing pedigree threw one punch and ended the biggest night of his career in under 5 minutes.
Huge right hand tuck is covering up. Big elbow. Wow.
That's not actually the most important part of this story. The important part happened 13 months earlier when that same fighter got hurt for the first time in his whole life and had no idea how to handle it. By then, the UFC had already spent 3 years turning him into the biggest bet in the middleweight division. Bigger stages, bigger paydays, a spot on almost every major card, whether the rankings said he earned it or not. Then, a 2-division champion from a completely different organization walked straight through his wrestling, hit him with power he'd never felt before, and left him on the canvas looking like every single doubter had been right all along. His own coaches admitted it afterward, and the fans added on. And somewhere inside that wreckage, a decision got made that would either save one of the sport's biggest investments or confirm it was never as real as everyone said. Bo Nickal didn't walk into the UFC as a normal prospect. He walked in as a finished product from a completely different sport. 3 national wrestling titles at Penn State, a perfect amateur run, a style of domination that made grown men look helpless the moment he got hold of them.
Months old, I'm like at the high school state wrestling tournament, so it was kind of just something that was in my blood.
Sure. Obviously, the wrestling is fucking second nature. I was talking to his mom once. He had like 85 wrestling matches before the age of 9.
When a promotion signs a wrestler with that kind of resume, it rarely happens quietly, and Nickal's numbers proved it. Sportsbooks made him one of the largest betting favorites for a debut fight in the UFC history, and he hadn't thrown a single punch inside the organization yet.
After this happened, the next morning, UFC, Bellator, ONE FC, PFL, boom, 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 call it.
Let's do it.
And I'm like, what the frick? Like, I'm 1-0 pro. I haven't even trained I've been training 8 months or whatever, 9 months.
That part gets remembered. What gets lost is the weight that came attached to it. Nickal wasn't just fighting opponents anymore. He was fighting a story that had already been written for him. The next homegrown American star. Built for pay-per-view main events. Built to sell tickets. Built to be one of the faces of the sport that has spent years searching for its next box office name. And when that kind of story gets threatened, the promotion isn't just risking a loss on a scorecard. It's risking a business plan. To understand why the UFC moved so fast on this kid, you have to go back to State College. Nickal trained under Cael Sanderson, the most dominant coach in college wrestling history, and came out of that program with a resume most fighters could never touch. 3-time NCAA champion, 3-time Big Ten champion, a junior and senior season where nobody in the country could take him off his feet, a world title at the under 23 level. And he's got the Hodge Trophy, wrestling's version of the Heisman, sitting on his shelf before he ever stepped foot in an octagon. None of that guaranteed anything in MMA. Plenty of decorated wrestlers have walked into the sport and discovered it doesn't matter what medals they've won. Wrestling gets you to takedowns, not fight-ending power, and it definitely doesn't teach you how to stand in front of a professional striker for 15 minutes. Nickal understood that going in, which is why the early tape mattered so much. His pro debut for Jorge Masvidal's promotion ended in a first-round finish. His 2 appearances on Dana White's Contender Series ended the same way. A guillotine and then a rear naked choke. Both inside a single round against opponents who were supposed to test him. He wasn't just winning fights, he was crushing them. And that combination of pedigree and power is rare enough that White called him one of the hottest prospects in the sport before Nickal had even signed a real contract. There was also a version of Nickal outside the cage that the UFC could not ignore. He showed up to his first press conference in a Rolls Royce, joked about it with reporters afterwards, and carried himself like a fighter who had already believed the spotlight belonged to him. That kind of confidence is either a gift or a liability depending on how the fights go. And for a long stretch, it looked like nothing but a gift. Once he got to the UFC, the pace only picked up. A submission win over Jamie Pickett to open his run. Then a knockout of Val Woodburn. A finish of Cody Brundage on the promotion's biggest card of the year. Every performance added another layer to the hype. and every layer added more pressure to a fighter who was still, by MMA standards, barely out of his rookie year. Then came the real first crack. Paul Craig, a durable veteran with nothing left to lose, survived 3 rounds with him. Nickal won on the scorecards, but for the first time, people started asking questions out loud. Could he finish a fighter who refused to fold? Was the granite chin and the killer instinct actually there, or had the hype simply outrun the resume? Those questions got answered in the worst possible way. In May of 2025, Nickal stepped in the ring against Reinier, a 2-division champion from a rival organization who had built his entire career on being underestimated. De Ridder absorbed the early pressure, found his range, and hurt Nickal in a way nobody had seen before. Nickal did not handle being hurt very well. The fight was stopped in the 2nd round, and the perfect record was gone. What happened after that mattered more than the loss itself. His own coach, Mike Brown, admitted publicly that the team had let the UFC move too fast and that Nickal's inexperience had shown against a more seasoned operator. That's not something coaches usually say out loud. It confirmed exactly what critics have been arguing since the beginning, that a wrestling resume, no matter how decorated, doesn't automatically translate into being ready for the top of a stacked division. For the UFC, this was the moment the entire bet was in danger. Years of fast-track bookings, primetime slots, and marketing built around one fighter, and now that fighter had a real loss on his record and had been cracked under pressure. Nickal didn't disappear. He went back to the gym he'd helped build in Pennsylvania and rebuilt the parts of his game that had failed him. Then, in June of 2026, the UFC handed him the biggest stage the sport has ever produced. The 250th anniversary celebration on the South Lawn of the White House. Nickal was matched with Cael Sanderson, a true veteran in the middleweight division. He took him down, put him against the fence, and finished the fight with punches at 4:34 of the first round. 1 round on the biggest platform of his life. He shut down all the shit talk that went on about him 13 months earlier. This is where the title of the story stops being a headline and starts being literal. The UFC's middleweight division has spent years without a single fighter who can move pay-per-view numbers on a name value alone. Nickal is one of those only prospects in the entire roster with the built-in story, the amateur resume, and the marketability to become that fighter. A genuine crossover star pulled from one of the biggest college sports in the country into the biggest fight promotion in the world. It also explains why the UFC kept handing him stages that most fighters with a 9-1 record never see. A White House card with a huge national celebration with the whole world watching is not the kind of booking you give a fighter you're unsure about. This is the kind of booking you give a fighter that you're actively trying to turn into a piece of American sports history. Every camera angle, every pre-fight feature, every mention of his college career is part of building a name that can headline arenas on its own without needing a title to justify the ticket price. A single bad loss doesn't end a career, but it can end a marketing plan that took years to build. Every fight from here carries that kind of weight. Every performance either reinforces the story the UFC has been selling since 2022, or it hands ammunition back to the people who always believed the hype was bigger than the fighter. That's the tightrope Nickal is walking that most fans never think about when they watch him fight. It isn't just his record on the line. It's a business decision the entire promotion made about who its next star was going to be, long before he'd proven he could survive adversity. A middleweight title run is still the real destination here, and Nickal knows it better than anyone covering him. The division has a defending champion and a handful of ranked contenders who all present a different skill set. Some who can match his wrestling, and some who can definitely outstrike him. Yet, none of them carry his stardom in front of a camera. That's the uncomfortable truth about modern MMA. Being the best fighter and being the biggest star are 2 different jobs, and only a handful of athletes in any generation get to go out and try both at once. Nickal is one of them, and everyone in the sport knows exactly what happens if he cashes that potential in. If Nickal could pull it off, a belt around his waist, and somebody who has made it to the Olympic trials, a following built from American college wrestling, and a proven ability to finish fights on the biggest stages the promotion can build, is the kind of star that doesn't come around often. This is why the UFC has absorbed the criticism for moving him so fast in the first place. They weren't just building a fighter. They were building a bet on what the next 5 years of the middleweight division could look like with him at the center of it. Nickal is 9-1 now, with one real loss in his record and one statement finish written directly over it. The wrestling still gets him to the fence. The chin has been tested, and this time it held. The only question left is the one nobody can answer from the outside. Can a collegiate wrestler who was built on the mats in Pennsylvania build up his striking ability to become the well-rounded fighter this division needs? Well, it's pretty clear the UFC made their decision when they put him on one of their biggest cards they've ever built. So, we'll see. Now, it's his fight to keep proving them if they were right to bet on him, or is it just a fluke?